You ready? Good. My niece, Emily, just got married last week. It was one of those complicated affairs involving COVID-19 and a guest list and national protocols in Australia. And they had to do a maneuver, and she had to get, for various reasons that I won't go into thoroughly, she had to get married quickly at the beginning of the week rather than on the Saturday. Anyway, she's happily married, and I'm happy for her and her new husband. But it just illustrates that life gets really complicated. And I think we're all living complicated lives. What this passage helps us with is it shows us Jesus living an extremely complicated life. And it gives us clues as to how to carry ourselves in the complexities that surround us. Mark's gospel is a manual in discipleship, amongst many other things. It shows us how Jesus conducted himself, what his world was like and how he lived in his world, his mission in the world. It showed how the first disciples, tried to follow Jesus in that same world and with that same mission. And through that, it gives us clues as to how to live in our world, following our calling, our mission in life. The Christians were first called Christianoi, excuse me, falling over my tongue, which meant little Christs, mini messiahs. It was a mocking term. But it does point to the fact that we are imitators of Christ, and our business, as Mark lays it out for us in his gospel, is to consider what did Jesus do? WDJD. For you petrol heads, not WD-40.
Well, it greases the wheels.
It does, yes, although that's probably a different number, right? Jesus' world, let's look at Jesus' world as presented by Mark. It's full of sickness and death. It's full to overflowing with trouble and strife. There are wonderful things in it, and of course Jesus brings about wonderful things because that's his mission. His mission is to make the world a better place. When Jairus comes to Jesus here, pleading for Jesus to come, he pleads that Jesus will come and rescue and save, and rescue and heal my child. Rescue and heal, save and heal. And that was the whole focus of Jesus' life. Now, Jesus has not been unbusy. He's not been in a reflective mode. He's been highly busy if you read the first part of Mark chapter 5. So he's often confronted with triage situations like this to decide, now do I do some teaching here, or do I respond to Jairus and go and look after the child? Now it seems like a no-brainer, right? Reflecting on life with his disciples, praying in isolation somewhere, or going to heal the child. That seems like pretty obvious. And it was obvious to Jesus too. Jesus had priorities in life, and they guided him as he made his decisions. The healing of a child, the call to heal a child, was both important and urgent. And the combination of being important and urgent led the way. And I think very often our understanding of where God's calling us can be led in the same way. Now, Jesus had just petrified a village in Mark chapter 5, petrified a village and sent out the first missionary. You can read about it in the first part of Mark chapter 5. They'd actually asked him to go, please go away. So he's come over the lake, and out of this busy life, he comes across another need. It's and expectations. Because Jairus is an important person, and everyone would have thought that Jesus ought to pay attention to an important person. One of the leaders of a synagogue, very, very important person. And So Jesus meets expectations, and they go along. It's a very popular move. Jesus goes along. A whole crowd comes along, jostling him, and suddenly, yes,
he stops. He's on this urgent, important mission with this important man. And the whole crowd is all eager to follow, to see this exciting event, to participate, to be there at the time. But Jesus stops. And he says the strangest thing. He says, who touched my clothes? And his disciples go, what do you mean, who touched your clothes? Could have been dozens of people are touching your clothes. And you can just see the disciples going, honestly, Jesus, let's just get on with it. Don't stop. Here we are on this urgent, important mission. But Jesus does stop because he knows that power has gone out of him. And we have to recognize that when we are going along with Jesus and doing the things that he wants us to do, it is costly. Even Jesus here, who we know from the rest of the story before we get there, has healed without touching, without anything affecting him. He was affected. He gave of himself, even unknowingly, and he realizes that. And so this interruption comes. He didn't have to turn around and speak to this woman. He didn't have to ask who it was. He didn't have to acknowledge what had happened. But somehow Jesus knows that every person who receives from him needs more from him than just the healing, just the physical thing. And so he turns and asks. Now, we wonder to ourselves, why is this woman so reluctant to say? Well, her problem was that she'd been menstruating for 12 years. Now, the women amongst us will know that that means that she was suffering. She would have been anemic, no cure for that in those days. She would have been constantly sore, probably. She would have been constantly tired. But more than that, remember in those days the things available for dealing with bleeding were far less. It was a far more complicated situation. So even physically, even just in daily chores, this was an issue. But more than that, the issue for her would have been that this made her ritually unclean. So she was not allowed to participate in many of the life-giving rituals of the Jewish community. More than that, it would mean everybody was reluctant to touch her, because if anyone touched her, they became unclean for that day too, until the evening, and then they had to bath, and it was a big schlep. So even her close family wouldn't have wanted to be in contact with her. She would have had to sleep on her own. She would have had to have her own seat that no one else sat on, if she even had family who was still looking after her. And so when Jesus asks who touched him, she is coming from a very shameful condition. Something, we talk about shaming people who have illnesses. She was shamed by her illness. And worse still, she would have expected that Jesus would be extremely angry with her because she touched him while she was bleeding, which meant that her uncleanness would have been passed to him. But when she realizes that Jesus is determined to communicate with her, she, trembling, must have taken enormous courage not to just scurry away, says, it was me. And she must have explained the situation to Jesus. And the crowd would have been like, what? No. But Jesus is not like that. He says, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Jesus wants to set her free from more than just the physical ailment that has dogged her for 12 years. He wants to set her free within herself. He wants to give her honor. He wants to lift her up. Before this whole crowd, he's saying to her, I am giving you life. I am giving you freedom. I am giving you peace. Isn't that beautiful? This woman has been ostracized, has been ashamed, has been degraded, has spent all her money on doctors, she's had a terrible 12 years. And now Jesus lifts her up, gives her her place in society, having set her free just because she had the temerity to believe that touching his cloak would be enough to help her. And so in sickness, in death, Jesus reaches out to her, and he has an intimate contact with her by speaking so one-to-one with her. But he couldn't have gone into a private place to do that. That would have been inappropriate. And so we see him interacting with her very intimately, but appropriately, because it's in a public place. Nobody can say, what was going on behind those doors? He wasn't touching her in a way that was ugly. He was reaching her in a very appropriate but very intimate moment as he gives her this freedom from her long suffering.
And that's, we see this theme going through this particular passage, that Jesus is bringing, Mark pushes out the boat with his vocabulary. He uses different Greek words for healing. He uses the word that we also use for save, but it means to heal, to make whole, or rescue. He uses the word that's sort of a medical word for to heal. He uses the phrase to be freed from your suffering.
Yeah.
It's as though Mark is just reveling in what Jesus was doing in his mission. And
he uses the word peace as well.
Yes. Yeah. Sure. There's so much in this passage. And then we come to the crux, because he's on his way to heal a child, and the people come and say, stop worrying the teacher. Stop worrying the teacher. Don't trouble the teacher anymore. Why bother the teacher anymore? The child is dead. Terrible moment for a father. Probably a terrible moment for Jesus, who we know wept at the tomb of Lazarus.
And it's like a limit to faith.
Yes.
Jairus had come filled with faith when his daughter was sick, but now everybody says faith only goes so far.
Yeah, we don't need the teacher anymore. We've come to the point of we've come to the funeral. We know how to do funerals. Let the teacher go and do his teaching. And of course, Jesus reacts to this in his typical abrasive way, when people are being hurtful to those who are in a weak position. And he says, no, she's not dead, she's asleep. And they laugh at him. And then he puts them out. He sends, there's this wailing and crying and the sort of dark energy that would have filled a funeral service in those days, especially with the death of a child. And I know some of you can relate to that along with us in a special way. And Jesus says, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Confronted with death, don't be afraid. Just believe. Wonderful words for all of us to carry in our hearts. And he just took 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother, and they went into the room where the body of the child had been laid out. Lesley talked about peace, that the woman had come to peace. Here's another example of how Jesus' mission brings peace, because he sends away the loud crowd, because he's going to do something. He's going to bring this child back to life, and he doesn't want her frightened. He wants her to wake up. From her point of view, she will just have blacked out after the fever or whatever had been troubling her. And he's going to bring her back, and he doesn't want her troubled. He just wants to gently bring her back and gently restore this family. And it's a quiet and holy, blessed space. Tali, we get back to the actual words that Jesus said. Little girl, get up. Talita kumi. Wonderful. I feel my sort of, it's such a wonderful memory. And anyone who has been helped secretly will be able to relate to this. I wonder if you've got an experience of being helped secretly, where someone's done something absolutely scintillatingly wonderful for you and not wanted any glory for it. And this is what Jesus does. He's got enough glory of his own. He's not going to turn this into a spectacle, sort of a road show, and call everyone together and lay out the child's corpse and then bring her to life, and then everyone would cheer. None of that. Jesus shows us how to do, he does his mission. The disciples learn how to do their mission. We learn how to do our mission with a sort of humble secrecy, but the power of God active in our lives. Of course, the expectations on Jesus were low. And he does more than anyone could ask or imagine. And what's he doing? He's making the world a better place. And he says, give us something to eat. Anyone who's had a 12-year-old child or currently has a 12-year-old child knows that they're
always hungry.
always hungry. Anyone who remembers being a 12-year-old child. And there we are. It's the happiest of happy endings. And in the middle of a dark world of sickness and death, Jesus brings light, healing, and life. So, Mark's Gospel, this passage.
What does it mean for us? Well, as we've gone along, I'm sure you picked up the meaning for ourselves of the kind of things that Jesus does for us and in our lives. But as Martin said at the beginning, Jesus' life also teaches us how we should behave, because we should be like him.
I do want to say, though, that we're not in the same league as Jesus.
No.
We are little leaguers.
Yes. So maybe we're playing schoolboy football, not international football, but we're still playing football with the same rules.
Yeah, that's a very good sporting image, Lesley.
Yeah. Where did that come from?
But I mean, it raises things like, what's my urgent mission? What is important and urgent in my life?
Yeah. And so often we're on a mission to do something, important, urgent, and somebody comes along what do I do? Do I continue with my important urgent mission, or do I pay attention to them?
Yeah.
Do I give
Yes.
them space?
How
do
much,
I respond?
How much love do I give to my interrupters?
Yes.
Whoops. Am I humble and secret?
Yeah. You know, so many Christian people who believe in miracles seem to believe in them on a kind of big scale in front of everybody. But Jesus shows us that very often his work is secret, and it's not meant to bring us glory. It's meant to make the world a better place. Mm. And even when we do things that aren't miraculous, when we do things that make the world a better place, we're not meant to get glory from that. We're just meant to be making the world a better place. But it is interesting that Jesus is very aware of what the right kind of secrecy is, what the right kind of intimacy is. You know, our world is so full of inappropriate interactions, especially in religious circles, Christian as well. And Jesus here shows us two different ways of being appropriate with people.
Yeah. It's all about a sort of wisdom that we need to ask God for. And another issue, of course, is am I more interested in the urgency of Jairus or the urgency of a woman with a chronic complaint who's got no money, no influence? Am I open to the least and the lowest and the lost?
Now, of course, there are situations for us where, you know, if you're an ER responder and somebody's dying, you don't stop to help somebody who's not dying. You can come back to them but Jesus didn't have that problem here. But what it does ask us is to constantly be aware of what's happening within us and around us, so that we're not dragged along by a mission that's our mission when we are needed to stop and respond to somebody right there.
Yeah. Mark's gospel is full of this stuff. It shows us how to follow Jesus by showing us what Jesus did and how he called his disciples to follow him. And if you're living a complicated life, take some time, pause to consider how Jesus leads you to live your life in the way that Jesus did.
And if you're in a position where you have a chronic need that's lived with you for years, or where you have an urgent need, then hear Jesus coming to you and speaking to you.
Yeah.